If you join this company and agree to the division procedure, you won't be able to leave until you retire. An ethereal voice repeatedly asks who she is. The woman, coming to her senses, finds herself in a room, lying on a table. She is confused and disoriented. The voice persists, asking her to answer a short survey of 5 questions. Unwilling to respond, she demands to be let go. Realizing she has no other choice, she agrees to answer. The questions are bizarre: her name, which U.S. state she was born in, to name any U.S. state or territory, what Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast is, and the color of her mother's eyes. She doesn't know the answer to any of them. After the survey, the door to her room opens, revealing a man who considers this a great result. A man is sitting in his car, crying bitterly. After calming down, he wipes his eyes, puts on a badge, and exits the car to enter a large building. At the entrance, he shows his pass to a woman who then calls to inform someone that Mr. Scout has arrived. Proceeding further into the building, he enters a locker room, changes clothes, leaves his personal belongings, switches ID cards, and takes an elevator. Inside, something strange happens to him, as if he is being reset. Exiting the elevator, Scout walks down an endless corridor and eventually reaches his office, where 2 of his colleagues are already working. As they begin sorting data, Mr. Milchick enters and asks Mark to step out for a moment. Mark follows him through more long corridors to Ms. Cobell's new office. Milchick suggests he compliment her on the new workspace. Upon seeing Mark, she invites him to sit and informs him that Petey, his friend, no longer works with the company. She then appoints him as the new head of the macro data department. Although he hasn't completed the necessary training, Irvin will assist him. They give him a manual that he must follow precisely. Mark and Irvin are in a small room with a monitor and a book of instructions. As Mark studies the information, Milchick sets up the screen, which displays an image of the woman lying on the table. Encouraging Scout, Milchick suggests they begin. Mark repeatedly asks her who she is. His voice brings her to consciousness. Irvin quietly informs him that he missed the introduction. Mark corrects himself, but the woman refuses to speak and demands to be let go. Struggling, he eventually convinces her to answer the questions. Ms. Cobell observes them. Entering the woman's room, Mark tells her about the excellent result, but she still doesn't understand where she is. She speculates that she was raised for slaughter, but Mark reassures her that this is not the case and tells her that her name is Helly. He explains that she has been hired for a position on the severance floor at Lumon Industries. Following instructions, he tries to respond to her questions with scripted phrases, but this only provokes her to throw a speaker at his head. He asks her again to sit and talk, introducing himself as Mark. He tells her that he also woke up on this table a few years ago, and someone asked him who he was 19 times. That was Petey, who later became his best friend. Despite this, Helly still wants to leave, and Mark suggests she ask to be released again. Walking with him through long corridors, they reach a turn. Mark stops and tells her that the exit to the staircase is around the corner, but he cannot go with her or even watch her leave. Laughing, Helly approaches the door, pushes it, takes a step, and finds herself back in the same corridor. After repeating this several times, she returns to Mark. She thinks she might be dead, but Mark convinces her otherwise. Together, they go to Ms. Cobell, who shows Helly a video explaining the situation. Once Helly leaves the office, a man enters, and Ms. Cobell expresses her extreme dissatisfaction with his first day in his new position. In Mark's office, a recording is played for Helly. She sees herself on the screen, explaining that this video will be shown to her new self in a few hours. She says she voluntarily agreed to the severance procedure, which will split her memories. Access to her memories will be determined by location, only work memories at work, and personal memories outside of work. The operation is final and irreversible, and the agreement is voluntary. Helly is shocked by what she hears and sees. She feels she has no choice now, but Mark thinks otherwise. If she returns to work tomorrow, it will be because she chooses to do so. At the end of the workday, Scout heads to the elevator, which takes him to the room with personal belongings. Again, he experiences a reset in the elevator as his personalities switch. After changing, he goes to his car, where he finds an envelope on the windshield. Inside is a note from management, informing him that he slipped while carrying boxes of documents and sustained a minor head injury. As an apology, they included a bar voucher. As he drives away, he almost hits Helly but does not recognize her. Arriving home, Mark opens a beer and watches TV. The next morning, he has a disagreement with his neighbor about the trash bins. Later in the evening, his sister arrives. He had forgotten that she invited him to dinner. She asks him to dress more appropriately, and they head to her house. On the way, Mark inquires about the dinner, insisting it can't be called a dinner if there's no food. At his sister's house, they are greeted by her husband. Everyone gathers around the table, but there are only glasses of water in front of them. One guest philosophizes about the importance of food in life, stating it is merely fuel for the body, not something significant. Others agree with this viewpoint. A woman remembers that Mark used to work as a history professor and asks for his thoughts on the significance of food. However, Mark can't contribute much as his focus was on World War I. The conversation shifts, and his sister's husband mentions that Mark's late wife also worked as a professor of Russian literature. Now, Mark works at Lumon Industries. The guests are impressed and curious about his job. They ask what he does there, but Rickon interrupts, revealing that Mark has undergone the severance procedure. Opinions among the guests are divided. Some think it's impressive and convenient, while others believe it traps him. After the guests leave, Mark's sister makes him a sandwich and insists he spend the night. She sets up a bed for him in the kids' room, wishes him good night, and leaves. Unable to sleep, Mark goes to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and sees a man outside through the window. Going out to the yard, he finds the man standing right across from the house, staring at him. The darkness is momentarily pierced by car headlights, blinding Mark. When the car drives away, the man has disappeared. In the morning, Mark tells his sister about the strange man. She thinks it might have been a lost bar visitor. That evening, Mark goes to Pippa's bar and receives a call from his neighbor about the trash bins. His conversation is interrupted by the same man from his sister's yard. The man introduces himself as Petey, claiming they work together. Mark doesn't believe him, insisting that severance cannot be undone or bypassed. Petey then reveals that he managed to hack the system, and now Grainer is after him. He gives Mark a letter, explaining everything he knows. The man opens the letter and finds a card inside. He reads it, recalling conversations they had about what kind of people they were outside of work, the decisions they made in life, and why. Petey had believed that only a monster could trap another person in that office. The card indicates that if Mark wants to know the truth, there is an address on the other side. He must go there alone to begin his journey towards the truth. Returning home, Mark encounters his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, who apologizes for the confusion with the trash bins. As he enters his house, he glances back at her. She is Ms. Cobell. Helly is recording a video. She says she understands that access to her memories will be determined by location. Her personal memories won't be available at work, and vice versa. She realizes that this procedure is final and irreversible, and her statement is voluntary. After finishing the video, Mr. Milchik asks her to follow him. As they walk, he tells her that her work personality will wake up in an hour on the separation floor, while her non-work personality will wake up in the evening as she takes the elevator up from the floor. They enter the operating room together, where a capsule is implanted in Helly's brain to separate her memories. Helly steps out from the corridor onto the landing, where Milchik is already waiting for her. He explains that this staircase was specifically designed to help new employees acclimate. In this space, her non-work personality is activated. Helly repeatedly goes back into the corridor and returns to Milchik. Each time she bursts out of the corridor, she thinks her work personality doesn't want to be there. But Milchik convinces her otherwise, and she goes back to the floor. Mark arrives at the office first. His first task is to look at the instructions, which outline everything he needs to do. Fill the soap dispenser in the restroom, sweep the floor with a special carpet brush, wipe all the countertops, and make coffee. While wiping a photo of himself, Irving, Dylan, and Petey, Mark decides to remove all the frames from the desks and hide them in the closet. At that moment, Helly arrives at the office, surprised that the weekend is over and feeling as if she never left. Mark tells her that you get used to it. She notices it's 9:05 and Mark explains that employees are staggered to avoid crossing paths when entering. Helly studies the manual, trying to understand her job. Meanwhile, Dylan boasts about his awards, erasers, finger traps, and caricatures. If he meets the quarterly plan, he'll be named the best processor and get a waffle party. While they chat, Mark finishes setting up Helly's computer. He asks her to turn it on. Mark finds a file named Sienna and opens it. It's the file she'll be working on. Irving interrupts, asking where the photo from their desk went. Mark says he removed them but assures there will be a new one with Helly soon. Mark resumes explaining. The open file contains a large set of numbers that need to be sorted into 5 folders, but Helly doesn't understand how. Mark explains that each category of numbers evokes unique emotional reactions in the processor. For example, numbers in the first category cause feelings of fear and unease. Helly is still confused. Irving interrupts again, upset with Mark for removing the photo, and demands it be returned to the desk. Helly is bewildered by what's happening and feels trapped. The man assures her this isn't the case. She can quit anytime. Her outside work personality can write a resignation letter and bring it in for her to sign. Mr. Milchik enters the room and suggests they play catch. They sit in a circle, each sharing some information about themselves. When it's Helly's turn, she refuses to play, stating she doesn't know anything about herself and has nothing to share. She asks Milchik for permission to make a recording for her outside work self to relay some information. He just laughs, explaining that any communication between the two personalities is prohibited. Not even a note can be passed. The elevator has code detectors that will catch any messages. Milchik throws the ball to Mark, who, after a moment, shares about the photo incident. He broke protocol by feeling sad while dusting the picture and thought he couldn't be as good a boss as Petey. That's why he hid the frames in the closet, which was against the rules. After the game, Milchik offers everyone some melon and suggests taking a new group photo. Helly is in shock from what she discovered and decides that she doesn't want to continue working in this company. She writes herself a note. Mark tries to stop her, but she manages to get into the elevator. As soon as the elevator starts moving, detectors trigger, and it stops. Mr. Grainer arrives at the elevator, but Mark quickly takes the blame for Helly. He convinces Grainer that this is his first training session, and he forgot to tell the newbie about the data transfer prohibition. Grainer releases Helly but asks Mark to follow him. He takes Mark to the break room and locks the door behind him. Mark finds himself in a strange place resembling a long, narrow corridor with a door at the end. When he approaches the door, it opens, revealing Ms. Cobell. Mark is sitting in a restaurant with a woman who is an obstetrician-gynecologist. They discuss her work, but she is curious about his job. He tells her he works in the archival department with confidential materials, which is why he underwent memory separation. She is surprised, realizing that he could start a relationship at work and not know about it, potentially get married and have children, but forget about them for 8 hours every day. After the date, Mark walks the woman home. On the way, they encounter a group of young activists campaigning for health and the abolition of the separation procedure. Mark approaches them, and the topic agitates him so much that he verbally attacks one of the guys. He argues that the separated aren't slaves, their work isn't slave labor, and no one is forced to undergo the procedure. Seeing the shocked expression on his date's face, he stops the argument, and they leave. Mark returns home and hears a knock on the door. It's Mrs. Selvig, bringing cookies as a peace offering, still feeling embarrassed about the trash bin incident. The next morning, Mark heads to work but decides not to go to the office. He calls Milchik, claiming he feels sick with a stomach ache and assures him he'll be back tomorrow. At the office, Dylan and Irving are worried about Mark's absence. Helly is concerned he might have been fired because of her note, but her colleagues reassure her. They think it's more likely he was sent to the break room. Sitting down to work, Helly asks about some job details. Suddenly, Irving feels ill and sees a black viscous liquid filling the space. Milchik arrives to take him away. Meanwhile, Mark arrives at the address in Petey's letter, a deserted old greenhouse. Inside, he finds Petey. Milchik escorts Irving to Miss Casey to check his health, scolding him for falling asleep at work along the way. Helly is still struggling to understand what she is supposed to do and can't figure out how to identify the scary numbers. Curious about what they're sorting, she asks Dylan, who shares his theory. He believes they're sorting the ocean. He thinks something happened on land, and people decided to settle the ocean, sending many probes. The numbers, according to him, represent terrifying sea creatures, and by sorting these monsters, they're helping to kill them. However, not everyone shares this view. For example, Irving thinks they're editing curse words out of movies. Mark asks Petey what exactly they work on in the department, but Petey doesn't know. He thought it would become clearer after reintegration. Suddenly, Petey grabs his head and starts crying. Once he calms down, he apologizes, explaining that it's the reintegration syndrome. Mark still doesn't understand what is so bad about their work there. Petey then plays an audio recording from the break room. In the recording, Mark repeatedly apologizes, with Milchik constantly doubting his sincerity and forcing him to apologize over and over again. Miss Casey calls Irving into her office. She turns on bird sounds, relaxing music, and dims the lights. She takes out a folder with facts about him. Today, she wants to share some details about his outside work personality. She asks him to relax and be open to the facts, but it's crucial to accept each fact equally and not share them with anyone. Casey starts reading the information, but Irving reacts strongly to certain things, and each time, she deducts 10 points from him. Irving returns to the office, feeling fully recovered from his session with Miss Casey. Meanwhile, Helly finally manages to process part of the file, identifying the scary numbers and sorting them into the correct folder. Mark offers Petey a place to stay for the night at his home, thinking his work personality would appreciate it. Petey is very grateful and heads to the shower. However, he doesn't feel well, experiencing a nosebleed and hallucinations. What do you think could go wrong if people started splitting their personalities using technology like in the show? Share your thoughts in the comments below, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.